Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Biology Bios. My name is Jim Edelman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Memphis. And my purpose with this podcast is really twofold. First, I want to let folks know that most Thursdays during the semester, we have talks by visiting researchers at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. And that's folks from all over the country and world talking about the really cool biological research that they do. The second purpose is to have those folks here learn a little bit more about them, how they got where they are, and what really excites them about the research they do. In addition, I'd like to say a quick disclaimer that I borrowed these questions from Rhett Miller's excellent podcast called Wheels Off, so please check that out as well. But without further ado, let's get to this week's guest. Thanks so much for being here. Dr. Natalie Clay, thanks so much for being here, and welcome to Biology Bios.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I generally like to start out with kind of the broad brushstrokes, if you would, of like what you're interested in research-wise, what kind of drives you as a biologist.
Sure. My position at the University of Arkansas is in forest health, and I specialize in forest ecology and entomology. I study how resource availability contribute to ecosystem functions such as plant growth, decomposition, biodiversity, and how these functions result in maintaining healthy and resilient forest ecosystems.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot. It sounds like your lab has a ton of components.
It's a diverse lab, which makes it super fun.
Nice. Yeah, I tend to be a distractible by shiny objects sort of thing. So I like having that diversity, right? Where you have all these different questions that fall under an umbrella like you just described. But yeah. How many students do you have currently?
In the lab currently, there are 4 graduate students. There's 3 PhD students and 1 master student, and an undergrad who's also doing research in the lab. So 5 students total.
Yeah, that'll keep you guys busy.
Yes, for sure. And they're great.
Awesome. So yeah, now I'm going to have to make you pick a favorite because I'm going to ask, is there so you have a lot of projects going on. Is there one that you're particularly excited about right now? And why are you particularly jazzed about that one?
So there are a lot of really great projects going on in the lab, and there is one I'm really excited about that we just started on. It is a National Science Foundation funded project quantifying terrestrial riparian and stream carbon connections, and particularly across a salt gradient. So in forest ecosystems, forests and streams are intimately connected through the sharing of matter and energy and carbon as vegetation and animal biomass, but usually they're studied in isolation. And so this means we often have fundamental misunderstandings about how changes in one system affects the other. So this research project will look at this global issue of salinization that's occurring in both terrestrial soils and freshwater systems to understand how that impacts this movement of carbon storage and quality between and these systems and within these systems, and see if we can predict what's going to happen. So ultimately, we can mitigate potential issues.
So with salinization, what sorts of forests are you looking at? Are you looking at eastern deciduous forests? Or are you more at like, I don't know, is this like a mangrove forest thing or?
That's a great question. So obviously there are forests that encounter very salty situations like mangrove forests. And then there's forests that in general don't encounter very salty situations. So those that are far away from coastlines often don't naturally receive lots of salt unless we have other happenings going on. Sometimes there's natural salt pockets, and other times we have secondary salinization, usually through human activities that might be associated with important things like road salting for protecting, people and lives, and agriculture for producing food, but they can have some non-target effects. And that can lead to increased salinization in these freshwater and riparian forests. So more of these inland forest ecosystems.
Yeah, okay. And so those ecosystems that aren't particularly adapted to high salt levels, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
so we know kind of what happens to forests when they get high salt levels. We know that's toxic. Plants don't really like salt.
Yeah.
But most of the increases in salts we're seeing, at least in this interface, are kind of these low level gradual increases. And so
Okay.
understanding these non-toxic sublethal
Yeah.
impacts and kind of where that tipping point is increasingly important.
So that's super interesting from like a fundamental. I'm wondering, are you going to be looking at sort of the selection gradient that places on some of these organisms? I mean, will you be able to see how they're actually adapting in real time?
So we won't do it quite at evolutionary timescales, but at
Uh-huh.
ecological timescales.
Okay.
So the cool thing about this project is it will use both experimental laboratory methods and combine that with observations about what's going on at across lots of natural forest stream systems. So in the lab, we'll replicate paired riparian stream system where we can add salt in an
Hmm.
ethical way instead of
Uh-huh.
out in the, these
Right.
natural freshwater systems and control and really see what's happening to the organisms, to the plants, to the aquatic systems. And then we'll see as well if our experimental systems in the lab match what's going on
Mhm.
in the real world. At the very least, they will tell us, help us understand the mechanisms driving changes in these systems. And then we can understand that better in more complex natural systems.
Yeah. So like changes in the community composition that you see when you're adding that salt in the lab.
Yes, so
Yeah.
organisms, the plants, what's going on with the soil nutrients, the water macro inverts and algae.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to look at as much as we can to understand this as best as we can.
No, it sounds like a great system for doing that, right? You have all these different endpoints that you can measure. That's super cool. Nice. Um, well, also congratulations on that funding. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Um, so I wanna kind of veer a little bit away from like the science that you're currently doing, and more towards like how you got to be where you are doing the science that you're doing. So, was there a time that you knew you wanted to be a scientist? Was this a aha moment or was it a slow burn? Like how did you get where you are?
That's a great question. A little cliche when I get to say that I always love bugs, much to, everyone's dismay. I loved insects, bringing home all the creepy crawlers and anything I could find.
Nice.
So that passion was always there, but I would say I didn't know how to get there. You had the
Sure.
National Geographic magazines and the nature documentaries, and as a kid, I'd see that and go, I want to be that, but I had no idea how to get there.
Hmm.
So then, I went to college. I went to Colby College. I got my undergrad degree I double majored in biology and art. Both of those were always passions for me.
Nice.
And it was really a fortunate, happy accident. My roommate had just finished doing a NSF-RU, which is the Research Experiences for Undergrads program. And right before the deadline, she was telling me about her experiences. And I was like, oh my goodness, this sounds like what I need to do to determine, do I really want to study insects? Do I want to
Yeah.
go down this science path? And so at the last minute, I applied um, for one of these and I got it to work in Costa Rica with Dr. Steve Unoviak looking at ants.
Nice.
And I from there was hooked. And it was at that RU that I learned about what grad school was and what that
Hmm.
pathway was. I had no idea. So if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would be where I am now.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point that it is very hard for a lot of undergrads to know what that looks like. I mean, I kind of was told, hey, if you like this stuff, you should try to get into somebody's lab and do research. And I was like, well, okay, so yeah. But there are all these paths to do that, but it's not like we guard the information on purpose, right? It's just that, you're teaching a biology class and you're like, okay, so this is how, this receptor works. And you're not saying, also, you should email professors that you're interested in working about, but,
Yes.
we should. It's sometimes hard to remember to do that or have the programs to do that. So like, yeah, the REU program is great for that. Yeah. Did you go to La Selva? Where were you in Costa
Yes, I
Rica?
was at La Selva. Have you been there?
I have. It's such a cool field
So
station.
cool.
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. And that's another cool thing of like getting this whole other community that you get to interact with because there'll be people there, yeah, working on ants, but they're people that are like recording the howler monkeys
Yeah.
and studying, this protein in this critter. Like there's just such this diversity. That's yeah. Oh man, so fun. Um, okay, so now you're in this world of science, and we get a lot of criticism from the outside. We get reviews of our grants, we get reviews of our papers, and I also have, the inner critic that second guesses things and says, "Oh, dude, I don't know that that's such a good idea." Um, how do you deal with that inner critic that comes up? How do you either maybe silence that critic or maybe make it work for you?
That's a great question, and you're right. We all hear that, and science is filled with probably more negative feedback than it is positive feedback most of the time, which is, you
There's
know,
no shortage.
there's no shortage. So I think, over time you develop a little bit of that thicker skin, but I
Sure.
think, for me, I think trying to remember that nobody knows everything and we're all learning, but that's also the fun thing about this career. Every day we're learning something new. And so it's okay to say, I don't know, and to go back and look it up. And in fact, that's a big part of our jobs, right? Is to do
Yeah.
research and to,
Yeah.
to find that area where we do say, I don't know, and find new discoveries. So I think that's one of the ways, but also the science is so big now
Hmm.
that, relying on great collaborators to come together and bring multiple areas of science together so that you don't always have to know it all. And you
Yeah.
can rely on other amazing people around you to synthesize ideas and bring those things together. And so even though you might be faced with a challenge or a problem, I think also surrounding yourself with a good, probably both scientific, but also personal support team of
Yeah.
good mentors and relationships helps get through those times that are inevitably part of this career.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of people say that. And or some version where like having that good support structure, that good community is really important. I couldn't agree more. And I like how you broke it into the two parts there. Like you have your kind of science support team, right? And then you have your personal support team. And a lot of times those people can be the same people, right? Like you
That's
have this
true.
great group of collaborators, and that person does the RNA-seq stuff, and that person does the actual muddy boots collecting. And like, but those teams can be really helpful for bouncing those ideas and be like, I think I have a really wacky notion. Can I just run it by you? And if you have the right people, they're going to be like, well, that is wacky. And here's how we could, actually follow up on it, like not just like, oh,
Absolutely.
that's just wacky, forget about it. um, so, kind of along these lines of well, it's a little bit of a pivot as well. So thinking about yourself when you're coming up, you're doing that REU and like what advice would you give to that, like, undergrad version of yourself working in today's world of biology? What new advice would you give that version of yourself if you met her today?
So I think it actually goes back to something you said. I didn't even realize when I was an undergrad that you could go work with a professor and get involved in a lab. And I I was like, okay, classes, must get through classes and learn
Sure.
information. But
Yeah.
I didn't, again, I only learned about these opportunities by last minute, by chance. And I didn't realize like I have a great resource with my professors. And oftentimes they're the ones who are making that textbook science. They're the ones that are producing those papers. And I had no idea. And so kind of like what you said, I think I would go back and tell myself to go join a lab and figure out what you like and what you don't like. Get that experience and lots of it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, the undergrads today are so much better. They're just involved and doing all kinds of amazing stuff as undergrads, going to meetings.
Mm-hmm.
It blows me away because yeah, they're leaps and bounds above where I was at that point.
Yeah, it's definitely there's so many and there are so many opportunities for undergrads that maybe I think might not have all been there, when I was coming up. Uh, but yeah, no, I agree with you that just making those contacts and if you're going to cold email somebody, if nobody's going to be like put off by somebody saying, "Hey, I think you do cool stuff and I want to learn more about it." Because it's a little bit of an ego stroke, right? Like,
No, but that's a good advice. Like I was terrified to reach out to professors, and in the end, everybody's just human, and
yeah.
it's important to remember that everybody's just another person, right? And you don't have to be afraid.
And sometimes we professors are dopes and we don't reply to emails because we got too many emails about exam questions that day. And like, it's just got, hit us up again. Say, just checking in. Yeah, I still think you do cool stuff. Like, um,
So that's perfect advice.
okay. So another pivot. What do you do? So you mentioned that you double majored, which I'm super interested in. But what do you do when you're not doing science?
Um, I again cliche, I love being outside whenever I can. So I like to go hiking and exploring. I love reading and traveling. I love seeing new places both in the US and outside of the US. I have a 4-year-old daughter, so she keeps me pretty busy most
I
weekends. And the
I would
hiking
imagine.
has been a little bit shorter, small
Yeah, a little
local
shorter
hikes
hikes.
recently.
Yeah, that's fair.
But but yeah, so spending time with my family and being outside and going to parks, and I think those are, and doing art with her now is
Oh, fun.
kind
Oh, that's
of where
awesome.
that comes in.
Oh, that's great. Were you painting mostly? Were you sculpting? What's your
My
medium?
yeah, my major was studio art. So I do a lot of drawing and or I did a lot of drawing and painting. Now it's fun actually because in science they've kind of embraced this graphical abstract and
Yeah.
figures are becoming so much more beautiful.
Yeah.
And so now most of my art expression is just by making those graphical abstracts or trying to make my figures not just lines and dots,
I
adding
mean,
something.
that is a superpower. That is like a good graphical abstract or like, in a grant proposal, like a graphical like showing the whole grant in like a figure. I love those.
Yes. And who doesn't love pictures, right? So having images when you're reading something is always nicer than just words and words and words.
Yeah, absolutely. And you landed in a great place with Arkansas for getting outside and having some nice topography, really nice forests out there. Oh,
It's beautiful. And Tennessee is lovely as well.
yeah. I mean, we're in the flatter part over here in Memphis, kind of West Tennessee, East Arkansas, yeah, kind of similar. Um, but yeah, we're striking distance to some really nice places. And even on this side of the state, there's some really great forests. Yeah. Um, okay, so I'm gonna flip it totally around to you and ask, what questions do you wish I had asked you that I haven't asked you?
Um, I don't think I have too many. I think you've done a great job.
Well, thank you.
And
I was fishing for that compliment.
no, but seriously, it's been fun. I think also shared a lot of valuable thoughts as well from your experience. And it's always fun to see when kind of coming from different perspectives, people kind of merge and converge on these same insights and ideas. And
Yeah, there's I don't know, there's an interesting set of parallels no matter like what kind of science people do. I've been lucky with this podcast to talk to people that do, hardcore molecular stuff to community ecology stuff like you do. And I'm surprised, I suppose, and pleased that like we have so many of these commonalities about the way we think about things. And it's the specifics of the systems that differ, but like we have these similar approaches and similar values. And yeah, it's neat to see.
And it's always fun, that creativity. I think that's one of the funnest things about scientists is they're creative. And so even if you are, working in forest ecosystems, you're watching a talk on neurobiology, just finding those connections and saying, oh my goodness, I bet that same process and mechanism are happening at this other scale in my system.
Yeah.
And it's just those like lovely eureka moments are so fun.
Yeah, I love that cross-pollination of the different, subdisciplines. And I mean, I love it when people bring stuff about physics into biology and, like, and you're just like, oh yeah, that totally works here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that made me think of what you said about creativity, I feel like is another important thing that maybe we don't talk about as much with undergrads because there's so much to learn about that's already out there. But, somebody like with your path, I feel like it's not that uncommon in graduate school to be like, oh, I double majored in science and music or science
Yeah.
and theater or, and yeah, we think about science as dry sometimes, especially at the undergrad level, but that creativity is so important. And I think I think that's worth communicating to our students a lot.
Absolutely. And you can't do science without that creativity, and it's a good balance too, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes you have your best ideas when you're strumming on a guitar or doing some other creative form of expression.
You're totally
Um,
speaking my language. I feel like I'm a better musician when I'm doing science, and I'm a better scientist when I'm doing music as well. Like
that's a
it's just
great quote.
the brain needs that balance. It really does, or at least my brain does. I mean,
Mine
I do
too.
think there are some people that are just like, I just want to do this one thing all the time, and I'm fantastic at it. But I feel like we think that's the norm, and it's not. There's so many different ways that we do science, and we come up with these ideas. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm super excited to hear your talk later this week. I'm going to do my best to get this posted in time so people will be able to learn a little bit more about you before they see you give your talk on Thursday. And yeah, we're just looking forward to hosting you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know everyone's so busy.
It's
And
good fun. I mean, I get to talk to cool people. Come on.
I think this is a really nice thing too, because it's so true. Like the conversations we had where undergrads often just don't know how to get from point A to B. And so getting to hear lots of different people's paths, that's just such a cool thing. This was an exciting when they asked about this opportunity. I was like, oh, this is so cool that you guys do this.
Awesome. Well,
So
I'm so glad that you were game. All right. Well, again, thanks very much, and we'll see you in a couple days.
see you in a couple days. Thank you.
Thanks so much to our guest this week, Dr. Natalie Clay. You can check out her talk on Thursday, April 3rd at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. Thanks so much for being here, and hope to see you there.